When steel talks, everybody listens.
The following is a piece called Whither the Steel Band Panorama, and it's written by Andre Moses, who is a former steel band administrator and educator. The Steel Band Panorama competition began in 1963, 1 year after Trinidad and Tobago achieved independent nation status. The backdrop was that the then private and public sectors had predicated the sanitization of the Trinidad Carnival as a precondition for its social acceptance. The transition from the road to the stage was one mechanism for this acceptance, and another was the enticement of sponsorship, competition, and prizes. Tony Williams's and Pan North Star's revolutionary approach to the musical challenge of the Panorama sealed the deal in that their linear sonata format of exposition, development, and recapitulation set the musical template for the Panorama, supplanting the more circular verse-chorus jam format that was more aligned to Pan on the Road, where the focus was more participatory and organic. While the sonata format was of European derivation, the content that was encapsulated within that structure was decidedly local. Calypso music had evolved as a distinct voice from the urban barrack yards that had served as a refuge for the ex-slaves after the abolition of slavery. The steel band's orchestral structure of a lead section, a middle section, and a bass section approximated that of African drums with its cutter, the rhythm, and bass drums. Call and answer was another African tradition that had survived the Middle Passage and also became an integral part of the Panorama music tradition. When Bobby Muhammad and Guinness Cavaliers became the second winner of the Steel Band Panorama, it was an instance in which the organic, rhythmic intensity of the road seemed to overshadow the smooth sophistication of the sonata's subtle key changes and suave arpeggio embellishments. Additionally, in an era in which the Rediffusion and the 2 AM radio stations were the only available audio channels and Latin music was a dominant component, it was inevitable that Latin influences would also become a part of the Panorama musical content, as Earl Rodney and solo harmonites would establish with their 4 Panorama victories. As the music school of the steel band Panorama evolved, a cadre of victorious Panorama arrangers created new curriculum by their innovative approaches to the music of the Panorama. With Ray Holman and Len Bugsy Sharp, it was a recognition of the universality of jazz music and our common musical heritage in their crossover approaches. Jit Samaru extended the boundaries of pan playing technique and emphasized the engine room and distinctive rhythmic changes. Clive Bradley developed the orchestral tone and texture of Panorama music in his experiments with harmony and voicing within a more lyrical, less frenzied framework. Leon Smooth Edwards also zeroed in on the percussive roots of the steel band, marrying it with the techniques and sophistication of the Panorama's evolving musical sensibilities. But 1963 to 2017 is a long time, 54 years to be exact, or over 5 decades to put it another way. Time enough for things to change in fundamental ways. As the steel pan instrument transitioned from a product of cultural creativity to an economic good, subject to the market forces of supply and demand, prices have risen from just below $100 to thousands of dollars per instrument. Division of labor and specialization, together with the dynamics of competition, has also resulted in an exponential increase in the cost of steel band tuning and arranging services. Meanwhile, the sound of music has also transitioned from the more subdued acoustic sounds of pan to amplified electronic sound systems more in keeping with the sonic sensibilities of a younger generation. Gradually and seemingly unnoticed, the crowds and national enthusiasm generated by the steel band Panorama have begun to dissipate, and like West Indies cricket, the symptoms of this loss of energy are quite evident to those who are perceptive enough to see. The North Stand that represented the next generation of steel band lovers has not recovered from the self-inflicted wound of the Panorama Greens. and a new generation of youth is growing up without any organic connection to the steel band, save for a fleeting engagement in a school steel band. At the same time, the average age of the grandstand faithful has been moving steadily northwards from 50 to 60 to 70 years. Yes, we still have the traditional big band rivalries to remind ourselves of how much we like our pan, but even that rivalry is becoming more predictable and routine. Phase 2 or All Stars or Phase 2. No disrespect to Boogsy and Smooth, thanks for the music, but it was nice to change the pattern with the Desperados' triumph last year. The truth is, while things have been all hunky-dory at the top, at the other end of the spectrum at the small band level, things have been increasingly tough, and many of the iconic bands of yesteryear have gone the way of all flesh. Which brings one to the current Panorama impasse. The fundamental issues at heart are issues of governance and accountability. If we focus on personalities in the main, then we can change or exchange the personalities and still end up in the same khaki pants. Pan Trinbago is a public institution, and as such, it is accountable to its membership and, by extension, to the wider national community. If questions are asked, then answers should be given. Asking a question is not necessarily making an accusation, and even if an accusation is implied, a clear answer can dispel any unsubstantiated suspicion. It is when public officials lack accountability that suspicion and lack of trust find fertile ground, and sometimes with good cause. No one has a right to question how private individuals spend their own monies, but with public expenditure, the general public has every right to question how funds are allocated. Governance is even wider than accountability. It encompasses the processes by which decisions are made, and it presumes a vision for the future that can propel the organization and its membership from one level to the next. In the context of the steel band Panorama, governance has to address the issues of economic sustainability, the active involvement of a younger cadre of membership, the integrity and survival of its participating bands, and the redesigning, recalibrating, and rebranding of the Panorama to survive and thrive in a 21st century context, amongst other imperatives. These are by no means simple or trivial governance challenges. Of course, as Trinbagonians, especially with a beer in hand, we can put forward a whole heap of solutions that other people should implement. But if we take pattern from a food chain in nature, we will learn that they are both producers and consumers, and in addition, that the producer level has to be the broadest and most extensive because it has to support all the other levels. At the most fundamental level, we have to generate the material and human capital to make the Panorama sustainable. Sure, the government and the NCC, the National Carnival Commission, have critical roles to play, but any organization that has to wait on a third-party input to sustain itself can fall at any time once that lifeline is cut or diminished. All organizations have a life cycle, a time to be born, a time to grow to maturity, and a time to die. To stave off death, organizations have to reinvent and revitalize themselves with new ideas, new people, and new challenges. In my humble opinion, Pan Trinbago is nearing the end of its life cycle in its present form. Also, the steel band Panorama is nearing the end of its life cycle in its present form. I'm not saying that the Panorama will die next year or 10 years from now. My question is, when the present senior generation of grandstand patrons move on, where will our Panorama audiences come from? If small community steel bands become unsustainable, from which source will the mega steel bands recruit their players? If a stipend becomes the principal motivation for playing for the Panorama, what will happen if the source of that motivation dries up? From the community steel band to the school steel band to our steel band governance institutions, we need to come up with a modern model for sustainable development. Panorama can still be relevant in this modern era, but not with its 1963 template too many things have changed in too many fundamental ways. History does not start and stop. There will always be a role for experience and knowledge, but we must give the upcoming generation the opportunity to refashion their reality in their own image and likeness, educate them about the glorious history of the steel pan instrument and its music, guide and nurture them, but be prepared to step aside and make way for the young folks. Ellie Manette and company were mere teenagers when they accepted the responsibility to fight against the odds to establish the miracle we also candidly claim today as our national instrument. And look what a splendid job they did. It will indeed be a travesty of the highest order if we sweep everything under the carpet and revert to business as usual. Let the present Panorama impasse be the catalyst for a new beginning, for the future of the steel band Panorama hangs in the balance.
When steel talks, everybody listens.